Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Preparing for September 2020 meeting. Sorry for the slight delay in starting there, just waited for a few more people to join us. Thank you for coming to our meeting. We hope that you appreciate the sort of face-to-face, as it were, nature of this. We thought it was a good way of explaining our situation and how we'll be in September, rather than just send you a letter. But we are making a recording of this presentation, and the presentation itself will be available on the website for those people who couldn't attend, or if you'd like to revisit anything that we talk about this evening. So we are recording, and that will be available. We will use the Q&A function, which is available for everyone who's just joined us, and we will use those questions to form a sort of frequently asked questions document, which we'll publish in the summer holidays. You'll see the date there. We are hanging on to that date because, as you'll be aware, DfE advice changes quite frequently, and there may well be updates that we need to share with you. So we will obviously put some more communications out during the summer holiday, which explains anything that needs clarification over that time. Apologies, there are lots of slides in the presentation, but because we wanted to make sure that you had the maximum amount of information available to you. So apologies for the content heavy nature of the presentation. What a strange time it's been over the last few months. Really very peculiar. School just isn't the same without the students, clearly, and we've missed them a great deal, and we appreciate it's been very challenging. It's been very challenging for the students, and it's also, I'm sure, been very challenging for parents as well, helping students to learn and to manage everything that has to have happened during the lockdown period. So thank you very much for all that you've done. We're very proud of our students, and we had some really fantastic feedback from them in relation to the meetings that they had with their tutors in the last fortnight. So we're very grateful that you've facilitated that for them. Thank you. So I'm joined this evening by Andrew Nocton, Deputy Head, Zoe Budding, Assistant Head, who has responsibility for the pastoral system, and Dennis Campbell, our Director of Learning Support and Inclusion. Poor Dennis joined us at Easter in the middle of the lockdown period, and he's going to just present a little bit tonight, and I'm going to actually introduce him personally so that you can see him, as you aren't familiar with him, as you haven't met him yet. So he'll be speaking a little bit later on. So we'll get on with the business of the evening. Obviously, the context that we find ourselves in, obviously, is that we've been in full closure since Monday the 23rd of March, and we have done a great deal. We hope to support our students since that time. We have remained open, apart from two days to the bank holidays in May. We were open throughout that period for key worker and vulnerable students. We had a remote learning plan, and we initiated that, and we've obviously tried to keep you up to date with our weekly communications, that's to students and to parents, and hope that you found that information useful. As we've gone through this and learnt about what it's like to be teaching in lockdown, we've introduced online Microsoft Teams lessons. We opened the school obviously to years 10 and 12. We've had some visits from students with the HCPs. We've done lots of tutor welfare calls, and of course the face-to-face tutor meetings that I've already mentioned. We hope that your sons and daughters have, where they can, have taken advantage of those opportunities. The government guidance that was published on the 2nd of July, we've been working on that obviously since that time, looking at risk assessments, planning what we can do, how we can open the school, how we can organise the school to make it as safe as possible for all students to return in September. So the agenda this evening, these are the things that we'll cover over the course of this evening, and as I said, this will all be available to you in the form of the presentation on the website and a recording of this meeting, and obviously we will update any of these issues if and when guidance changes from the DfE over the course of the summer holidays prior to opening in September. So in terms of September opening, the guidance has a number of principles. The overriding principle is to try and reduce contact as much as possible. So we are expected to group students together in year group bubbles, or we're calling them pods, avoiding large gatherings and trying to minimise movement around the school, and therefore the transmission of any infection between students and staff. So we need to try and avoid contact between groups, and the guidance recommends staggered start and finish times. More about that later. Staggered breaks and lunch times. Adapting classrooms to make them more COVID friendly. No, I'm not sure that's the right term, not COVID friendly, but you understand what I'm saying. Arranging classrooms with forward facing desks and limiting access to shared equipment. But very important for me is that the curriculum remains broad and ambitious, that all students continue to be taught a wide range of subjects and maintain any subject choices they've had. And that is really important for me. We want to ensure that students don't lose out in our reopening plans. Obviously, staff will have to maintain a distance from students, and the sort of social distancing rules we'll explain a little bit later on. Students should try and maintain a social distance from each other wherever they possibly can. I appreciate that's not always going to be easy in the school situation. We need to minimise the number of visitors to school wherever possible, and we should avoid large gatherings of students and visitors. So in terms of our proposed response, that's what we're planning to give you this evening. We won't have answers to everything. We have done a lot of work in preparation, but there are still details that we need to iron out and practicalities that we need to sort, and a risk assessment will be published on the website as it was previously once that has been completed. But until we've got all of the detail, I don't want to publish a risk assessment that might miss anything important out. We've obviously got the Q&A function, and Zoe Bunning is going to be monitoring that. So if you have got questions, please do put them in there, but you might want to wait till the end, because hopefully we'll answer a number of your questions as we go through our agenda. Okay, so what is in terms of what we're doing in terms of our proposed response, and what are our principles? Well, we absolutely, as I've said, want to maintain a broad and balanced curriculum with students following all their normal lessons, including all of their option choices. We don't want to limit the opportunities that students have in their studies. We are setting up year group pods to avoid mixing, and students will remain in their pod during the day as far as possible, and the teachers will move between year group pods. Students from the mainstream autism base will access mainstream provision wherever possible, and we've arranged the autism base to enable them to do that. What it does mean, unfortunately, is we have to have year-based tutor groups, and Zoe will talk more about that later on. We are going to maintain the house links through those year-based tutor groups until any advice changes on the need to keep year groups separate, and then we intend to return to vertical tutoring. That was obviously quite a fundamental change to how the school operates, it's disappointing that we've got to do that, but obviously to keep everybody safe, that is our overarching intention of this. We will have staggered break and lunch times, and that will be explained a little bit later too. But because of the buses and the large amounts of school transport that's required, we can't really stagger the start and end times. There's a certain amount of natural staggering, particularly at the start of the school day, but we can't really have staggered start and finish times in our context. We are having enhanced cleaning, and particularly where shared spaces are required, and we'll explain a little bit more about that later on. And we'll be encouraging robust hand and respiratory hygiene while students are in school, of course. Okay, so what does that year-based provision look like? Well, each year group will have a main teaching hub where the majority of their teaching takes place. So you can see here, for example, that year 8 will be taught predominantly in the new English block in classrooms 1 to 8, and we also have the new library space there, which will be available for a tutor group, but hopefully not for lessons. And then we've identified a main IT space for each year group for the courses that they need to follow, and each year group will have their own arts room as far as possible to try and avoid having to share those facilities. And as I said before, if we have to do that, then we will make sure that the area is cleaned between different year groups using the particular facilities. So a little bit further clarity there. Some most of specialist lessons, so science, technology, drama, music, will take place in specialist rooms. However, to make the timetable work, there will be elements of those courses that are delivered in a traditional classroom rather than in a lab or a technology room. And obviously we're developing the curriculum to ensure that doesn't disadvantage students. And in fact, it can be beneficial to have a sort of a theory-based room as well as a practical room. Year 8 to 9 will predominantly be in the same teaching group. And so at the end of each of their lessons, they will leave the classroom and they will wait outside ready for the next class to begin when the teacher arrives. Because they will just to give them a bit of a chance to stretch their legs, maybe a little bit of brain gym on the way in and out of the classrooms, just to give them a bit of a freshen up time before the next lesson starts, because we don't really want them to have to sit in classrooms for more than a lesson at a time. Okay, in terms of our curriculum, we're calling it a moving on curriculum. Lots of talk has been made of catch up. We're not talking about catch up. We don't want students to feel pressure to catch up. We will obviously be developing opportunities for students to revisit areas that they may not have been able to access during lockdown. But we are looking positively at our curriculum and how it will develop students from the beginning of the next academic year. So we will, as I've said before, deliver the full curriculum. There's currently an off-qual consultation on the exam arrangements for the 2021 exam series. So those will affect current year 10 and current year 12. If you haven't had a chance to look at that, you might want to, as parents and as students, give some feedback on what you think about those proposals. That closes tomorrow. And the link was in a previous newsletter that I sent out, I think last week's, possibly. We're going to start the new year with new topics, so everyone begins in the same place. And during the year, as it says here, we will identify gaps, reassure students and support them to try and to bridge those gaps as far as possible through their own independent study and obviously with input from their teachers. But we will take a measured approach to that rather than try and identify gaps and have a rather dull gap-filling curriculum from the beginning of September. I don't think that will motivate students or be in their best interests. We'll try to encourage as much socialising in terms of learning as possible, so group work, research, opportunities to talk to each other and to listen. Oracy is very important in the modern curriculum and certainly helps students in terms of their English language development, and so we will try and focus as much as possible on that. As well as developing resourcefulness and independence for self-study. It's clearly apparent that if students have to be isolated, either as individuals or as groups or as an entire school cohort, that they develop those independent learning skills that are going to stand them in good stead for the future, and clearly will be very important in the event of a lockdown. So we will be looking at developing that through subject-based revision as well, and also through homework. And we are also continuing to develop an online curriculum to support independent student learning, so that in the event that students can't access school, or as I've said, either as individuals or as groups, they will have access to online materials over and above those that are generically available to all through BBC Bitesize and Oak Academy, etc. Okay, enough for me for a minute or two. I'm going to introduce you to Dennis Campbell, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself and about his department and about what they will be doing to support students who require additional support for their learning. So handing over to Dennis.
Good evening, everyone. It's rather unusual to be introducing myself virtually, but my name is Dennis Campbell and I'm the Director of Learning Support and Inclusion. The return to school is going to be a challenging readjustment for all of our children, but we're extremely conscious that this proposed response is going to have a profound impact on our SEND children, and as an inclusion team we'll be working extremely hard to minimise this impact as much as possible. We are keen to deliver specialist provision where possible, and I'd like to talk through some of the changes that will be made in order to make this possible moving forward. As you're aware, I'm recently appointed, but we've also now recently appointed an inclusion manager. And both myself and the inclusion manager will be based within the inclusion department on a day-to-day basis, and we will manage the students and manage the provision in place as much as possible from there. As stated earlier, students will be expected to attend mainstream lessons and tutor group as often as possible, and they will be expected to stay in their year group pods. And quality first teaching strategies, additional strategies to help students will be shared with staff regularly and updated regularly to ensure that this can happen. As stated earlier, staff as well are able to move between year group pods, and in order to support this, we will be working as hard as we can to be with the students as much as possible and to follow government guidance. In addition to keeping them in the classroom, each year group pod will also have access to their own provision within our inclusion department. And as you're aware, the base is normally upstairs. Unfortunately, we're not able to do that for the coming months, but we are fortunate to have a lot of facilities and a lot of rooms that enables us to break that base provision down into separate year group base hubs, really. Where possible, our learning support practitioners and our teaching assistants will be assigned to individual year groups to deliver in-class support. However, of course, government guidance does state that staff must maintain a 2-metre distance from students, and therefore support will be peripheral and or group based. Appropriate additional measures will be in place and are already planned where staff have to come into close contact with a student. For example, any students who require personal care. External agencies such as the speech and language therapists and the complex communication team, they have been told that they are allowed to come in and deliver specific interventions to our children, but of course, again, following government guidance and following guidelines, but that will allow us to deliver more specialist intervention packages as planned. Thank you. It'll be important, of course, to talk through any changes, any worries, any anxieties that the students have, and I will be sharing this on the school website and with yourselves as a way of a discussion point, really, to work through at home in preparation for coming in September. I wouldn't say it would be worthwhile doing it at the moment, but maybe closer to the start in September, this worksheet would be quite useful, and I hope that this is beneficial for you. Please, if there are any questions specific to SEND provision, please ask the questions. I'm happy to answer them. And if you do wish to get in contact with me, I am contactable, and please don't hesitate to contact me at any point. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dennis. OK, next I'm going to ask Zoe to talk about some of the arrangements for pastoral care in September. And Zoe, you're muted.
Good evening, everyone, and especially hello if there's any students out there that we haven't seen for a really long time. Good evening to you as well. Those of you who have heard me speak about vertical tutoring will know how much I love it. So I'm very disappointed that we have to suspend our vertical tutoring, but obviously it is the safest thing to do at the moment, and to tutor in year groups. However, the ethos of tutoring at Pastoral High, the care that the tutors will provide remains in place, just in a slightly different format. So we will be tutoring in the year-based tutor groups, and there'll be 9 tutor groups in each year. We're keeping the students in their houses, and we are keeping students from the current tutor group in the same new tutor group, with the idea that when we revert back to vertical tutoring, they will have been with those students all the way along. The tutors will be slightly different, and they will be from areas where that year group is based, to again minimise mixing and to minimise movement of staff. Thank you. In sixth form, we have year-based sixth form and year-based tutor groups in the sixth form as well. There will be 7, and there'll be a mixture of year 12 and 13 students. Now that's still fewer students than there are in year group pods lower down in the school. And unfortunately, we are going to have to mix houses to make the tutor groups work in the sixth form. Thank you. So as you can see, we have sort of house-based tutor groups, and the way that we've named them is the letter of the house first, then the year group, and then A, B and C, as we have 3 in each year group. So A8A, the Armstrong Year 8 tutor group A. And you can see that that works all the way through year 9, 10 and 11. And you can see that all the students from the same houses are being kept together. Something I will say is that the students will not be with their original tutor. We can't make that work for everyone, so all students will have a new tutor for the duration of our year-based tutoring. And then when regulations allow, we will be back to our vertical tutor groups. Thank you. Now we know that when students return to school, for some they will have been out of school for quite some time, and it may well be difficult for a range of reasons. We've got a number of them on screen, but we've had conversations with many parents and many students who have got a number of anxieties related to returning to school, be it general ones about the virus, be it just because of being away from school for a long time, or personal things that have happened over the time of being out of school. So we do know we need to focus a little bit more on the pastoral care of the students in these areas, and so we'll spend time in tutor time and in the wellbeing sections of PSHE and society and ethics in order to address a number of techniques and a number of things that may have affected students over the time at lockdown. Thank you. So a number of things that we may look at, and sort of jump to the bottom of the slide first. It may well be that students need to learn how to be with each other again, how to communicate and feel secure in a very different environment than they've been in the last few months. And so we may well have team building and well-being activities, but also we might well be talking about how to improve coping skills, ways in which to cope in difficult times. And we will be allowing students to have that time to talk about how things have been when they haven't been in school. Thank you. So in tutor group, this is a sort of an example of what you might be doing in tutor. We will be looking at independent learning and organisational skills. We have seen how important that independent learning is and will be ongoing throughout the school career, but particularly at the moment. And organising again, having to have all the right books, all the right stuff, and be in all the right places when that hasn't been an issue for quite some time. As I've mentioned before, looking at team building and well-being and trying to encourage the students to communicate with each other and spend some time with each other again, and sort of that easiness, that friendliness that perhaps has been missing over the last few months. We are going to continue with our house assemblies, but we can't have large gatherings of students, so they aren't going to be in person. They will be over Microsoft Teams in the same way that we've been teaching over Teams for the last few months. Some celebrating, raising aspirations, just looking at the big wider world out there. And then, as always, potentially ending with our Friday quiz. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Zoe. I'm going to hand over now to Andrew Nocton, who will talk about some of the detail.
Good evening, everyone. It's good to connect with you, albeit remotely at the current time. I'm just going to cover a few of the other areas that are impacted by the government guidance and the change of circumstances that we're faced with in September. I'm just going to start with transport. I'd just like to caveat a little bit that there's an awful lot of ongoing guidance still to be determined here. There have been recent meetings with the bus companies, both school transport and public buses, and there are other meetings upcoming, including one I believe Mr. Hanson is attending tomorrow. So the guidance that we're sharing with you at the moment is how we currently have it, but it may be that there are some slight changes, and if so, obviously we'll inform you in good time ahead of September. So just to start with, we would encourage, where possible, students to walk or cycle to school. We appreciate for many students that's not possible, but where it is, we would encourage you to do so, both for the positive reasons of minimising contact, but also to reduce congestion. Were it to be that students are being brought to school by car, as we've implemented just during the lockdown period, we'd appreciate very much if parents and carers could get in the habit of just dropping students off in the North car park, the area of the site nearest to the station, please, to remove any congestion around the main entrance and bus bay for the students when they arrive at school. In terms of school transport, Worcestershire County Council, as I've mentioned, are still formulating some of their plans, and as soon as they've done so, they should be sending those out to parents and requesting some feedback. So we would encourage you, please, to try to look over their proposals and give them any necessary views to ensure that the plans are as suitable as possible prior to September. As we understand it at the moment, the County Council are proposing that students are likely to sit in year group areas on the bus, so mirroring what will be happening in school, possibly in allocated seats. And although at the current time it's not compulsory for students to wear masks on school transport, we would encourage them to consider doing so, and also to socially distance in the ways that are recommended elsewhere. When it comes to public buses, this is possibly currently a little bit more of a challenge. The capacity on public buses is currently quite reduced, and for many students who take public transport, this could be an issue. So we know that the county are looking at the possibility of, in the short term, converting some of the public buses into school bus only routes, in order for the students to be able to travel more safely to school and to ensure that the capacity is available. If you are on a public bus as a student, then it is a reminder that face masks are mandatory on public buses. Just in terms of arrival to school, by definition, in the window before school, it tends to be quite staggered how the students arrive, because buses arrive at different times, as do students and parents dropping them off. But as soon as students do arrive, we'd be expecting them to head over to their designated area and to start their day over there. So it's not going to be possible, as you'd expect, for year groups to mix prior to school around the school site. Students will have to go to their designated area and or their tutor room. If a student happens to be late for any reason, then the usual rules will apply. Students will only be able to enter the site through the school reception, and obviously social distancing will apply within the reception area, so students may have to wait outside until the due time. In terms of departure, this is something we're still finalising, but clearly something that we'll also need to have a clear plan in place for, because we're not staggering the end of the day. The end of the day will be 3:30 formally. However, we will need to have a staggered end of sorts in place, just to ensure that the usual crowds of students in the bus bay aren't present at the end of the day. So we're currently working with the bus companies to see about guaranteeing the arrival of buses at certain times, so that we could release students possibly 2 or 3 minutes early, possibly hold some students back by year group 2 or 3 minutes after 3:30, just to ensure that there's something of a stagger to the departure. But obviously with it mixed year groups on the buses, this is a bit of a logistical issue that we just need to give a bit more thought to, but that is certainly what we're intending. Finally, we appreciate for a number of new students to the school, you're possibly worried about you don't really know where to go at all. So on the first day for year 8, the new year 8 on Thursday the 3rd of September, and similarly for new year 12 on their first day on Friday the 4th, then you will just be directed to an outdoor area which is opposite the sixth form centre in the first. And please don't worry, whatever time you arrive on the school site for your first experience, there will be plenty of members of staff around to greet and direct you. So you don't need to worry about that in the first instance. Thank you. I've just included this slide for reference, really, for those parents and carers who are in the process of or usually organise school transport. It's just the appropriate web page from the County Council's website. There's a number of things you can do here: track your application, make your application, get updates on information, and so on. But all the links are contained here, so should you wish to just follow that up, you can just reference the particular slide. Thank you. We have already published our start of term arrangements, and I hope you can appreciate, as we outlined, the priority just in the first few days, apart from being given to staff to prepare, it's been given to those who are new to the school, and also to Year 11, given the fact that they have public examinations later in that academic year and have had no face-to-face contact within school with their option subject teachers. So that day for Year 11 is going to concentrate upon their option subjects. Year 8 across the Thursday and Friday will concentrate on induction activities and starting lessons from their timetable, and Year 12 on the Friday will just be a range of induction activities, with the full school 2-week timetable beginning for the first time on Monday the 7th of September for all returning students, and we're very much looking to see everybody at that time. Obviously, as Mr. Hanson mentioned earlier, any further instructions that are required due to changes or additional guidance we will issue prior to the start of term with the latest arrangements, so please don't be concerned again. Everything will be published in due course. Thank you. Given the fact that we're required to keep our year groups in pods, that has to remain in place as far as possible throughout the school day. So we've explained already how that happens from a teaching and a tutoring point of view, but clearly during the day we'll need separate arrangements for both break time and lunch time. So if I could start with break time first, our plan is to stagger breaks, and this results in period 2 being merged with break time for some students. So effectively, we've identified a window of time between 10 o'clock and 11:20 when break will occur for 20 minutes for each separate year group, instead of the usual 11 o'clock until 11:20 for all year groups. So what it effectively means is that Year 8 will have their break and then their period 2. Year 11 will have period 2 and then their break, but years 9 and 10 will have to have part of period 2, then their break, and then the final part of period 2. We appreciate this isn't ideal, but obviously the overriding issue here is keeping the year groups separate, and this is the most appropriate way to do so and give everybody access to the school canteen and servery. You'll notice that for the sixth form students, we're going to create a new servery available within the sixth form centre, so the sixth form students don't need to use the dining room in that regard. And when the dining room is used during the day and the hall by all students at break time, because it is on a rotating basis and we're trying to minimise contact with surfaces and so on, it will be standing room only. There'll be no tables or things of that regard, so students will just be able to stand during break time. And we'll also have a designated outdoor area in which they can go to make sure that we're adhering to stopping the spread of the virus rules as far as possible. We've been very clear and needed throughout for students to be identified by their house. Clearly that's their tie, but now we need a bit of an identification from September a bit more easily in terms of students and their year group, given the new arrangements. So we're aiming to issue lapel badges by year group, just for easier identification of students by staff. Thank you. Just in terms of lunchtime, it's a similar arrangement. Again, we've identified a window of time. So instead of the usual 1:20 to 2:10 lunch break, we're extending it from 12:20 until 2:10. And what this means is within that window, each year group will have their lunchtime and period 4, but as you can see from the chart, at differing times. So ostensibly, the first 50 minutes will be Year 8 and 9, with Year 8 having first opportunity to access the servery and Year 9 having the second chance to access it. And then after their lunch, they will go into period 4. And whilst they're both out on lunch, they'll have separate indoor eating spaces and they'll have separate outdoor spaces. So there shouldn't be any need for the year groups to come into contact during that time. And then similarly, the second half of this window sees years 10 and 11 have their lunchtime, with Year 10 having first access to the servery and Year 10 following. Again, separate indoor and outdoor spaces, but they will have their lunch after having period 4, which is what the students are used to anyway. This means that as normal, our school day recommences at 2:10 with tutor time, followed by period 5 at 2:30, and then the school day will end at 3:30. Thank you. Just a word about equipment. We know many of you have got questions and potential concerns about equipment. So just a reminder, on the left-hand side is all of the personal equipment that we require students to bring into school. It's what we've always required, it's what we still require, and potentially in the current circumstances, it's even more important because frequently used equipment should not be shared at all by students or by staff. And so it's really important, thank you, as more than ever, that students come properly equipped to school every day with their own personal equipment. You'll notice on the right-hand side, there's a few additional arrangements that we're putting in place for September. And again, the top two are really very important, please, because again, they're personal items of equipment. So if it's at all possible for the students to bring in their own hand sanitizer, that would be appreciated. We are going to have hand sanitizer stations around the school for use, but clearly it's in everyone's interest to have their own amount of this to be able to use during the school day whenever they wish. Similarly, as there's going to be restricted access to the water fountains to avoid cross-contamination, it will be very beneficial for students to bring personal transparent water bottles. There will be access during the school day to fill these up periodically, but it may not be as frequently as the students would like, and therefore it's important they start the day with their own water bottle fully replenished and ready to go. Thank you. What finishes this slide is the advice from the government with regards to equipment. So frequently used equipment, as I said, should not be shared. We are allowed to share classroom-based resources within the year-based pods, but we are going to recommend that students sanitise before and after using this. And if for any reason we're sharing resources between year groups, there are certain protocols that we as a school need to follow in terms of how often they're used or how often they're cleaned, and obviously we'll be adhering to these. It does say in the guidance that staff and students can take books home and other shared resources. We will be looking to minimise this as far as possible, but that is something that the guidance does allow. Thank you. In terms of uniform, this slide is split the same way. So on the left-hand side are all of our usual requirements in relation to uniform. So they're really just something of a reminder for September. The main one being that we are going to require full correct uniform from day one in September. However, as you would expect, there are some additional arrangements that need to be made over on the right-hand side. The main one is, which again is a practical thing really, is once a student has their timetable and they know what days that they have PE, students will be allowed to come into school wearing their PE kit and not their full school uniform. Obviously, this will mean that during the rest of the day, they may need to have some additional clothing, and the second bullet point outlines that they will be able to wear black, grey or dark blue hoodies and tracksuit trousers only as cover for their PE kit. There may clearly be an issue periodically with wet weather and PE kit getting wet, but so a change of clothes or a change of sportswear might be appropriate in that regard. But effectively, we're trying to minimise the use of the school changing rooms so that we don't need to do that clearly during the school day. Government guidance states that a number of you will have asked this question already just about uniform and frequency of washing. Although it was stated early on that fresh clothes needed to be worn to school every day for students who've been attending school during the lockdown period, the latest government guidance states that uniform now need only be washed at the same frequency that it would ordinarily have been washed. So it is possible, therefore, to wear full correct uniform, including blazers and ties, from the start of September. As we've alluded to already, we know this is an ongoing bit of guidance which is under review, but the guidance that schools have been issued has declared that schools are not requiring students to wear face masks at the present time. We obviously have a full range of other control measures that Mr. Hanson will outline later. But at the present time, that's the case that students do not need to wear masks. Obviously, if this guidance changes, we shall update our guidance to you accordingly. Thank you. Disappointingly, there's obviously a number of school events within the calendar that we're having to reconsider during the autumn term. Many of these are highlights both for staff, parents and students. But as you'd appreciate, in the current circumstances and the guidance suggesting that we do not have external visitors into the school and similarly have large gatherings of people, it seems only appropriate, unfortunately, to postpone all of the events from the calendar which are listed on this particular slide. We are clearly working hard to devise alternatives, and particularly for things like parents' evenings or some of the other information meetings, we may be able to run things online, and we are looking into that, organising contact with parents and carers and students remotely. But clearly at the present time, until further notice, none of these events will go forward in school as originally planned. Thank you. Similarly, the guidance for school trips is similar. Currently, the government advises that any overnight domestic UK trip or indeed overseas educational visits we're not allowed to progress with. And so we've got a couple of trips in the pipeline where to Berlin and the PE sports tour, which are happening next year, which we've put on hold. And similarly, we're looking a bit further down the line at other planned overseas trips. But clearly, people who are on those trips will be notified in due course about those individual arrangements. One thing also we do just want to point out is the guidance does allow schools to resume non-overnight domestic trips within the autumn term. And again, it's with a heavy heart in many respects, but we don't believe at the present time that it's an appropriate thing to do, because many of the trips that we have planned, such as history trips to the Tower of London or art gallery trips for various year groups, to name but a couple, require taking the students to enclosed public spaces. And at the present time, we don't feel that's an appropriate thing to do. So a final decision will be taken on this at the start of the autumn term, again, based on the current advice and guidance at that time. But I'm afraid at the moment, we're not looking to run any trips of that nature just in the autumn term. As Mr. Hanson said, the Ofqual consultation closes tomorrow. But one of the things that it does do is state within it that a potential removal during the next academic year for the requirement for students to do geography fieldwork off-site. And so again, where those trips have been planned, we wouldn't plan to go ahead with those, dependent upon what the outcome of that particular consultation says. Thank you. And then finally from me, just a word about attendance. We appreciate the efforts and the lengths that parents and carers and students go to ordinarily to get themselves into school on a regular basis, and we're very grateful for that. And we don't need to rehearse the arguments about how important it is for students to be in school, both from an academic point of view and also from a personal development and social point of view. But you've probably seen in the news that despite all of our potential anxieties about the school return, which we're obviously trying to allay at the moment with this introductory meeting, attendance is going to be mandatory for all students from the beginning of the autumn term. So that includes, for example, a pause on shielding. All adults and children who might be shielding, that comes to, the guidance suggests, an end on the 1st of August. And this means that those who are shielding on the shielding list, or indeed family members who are shielding, should also be able to return. Mr. Hanson's going to explain in a little more detail next the clinical and public health advice. But where students are unable to attend school due to this, they will have access to remote education guided by staff within school, which will be a mixture of school-based resources, possibly BBC Bite-Size, possibly the Oak Academy lessons. But you will appreciate where we're running a mixed economy of having the majority of students in school, albeit with smaller numbers not in school, we aren't able to provide more of the bespoke, personalised curriculum, including Teams lessons, unless we are in a situation where all of the school has gone into lockdown, there is a localised lockdown, or we have particular cohorts or year groups who, for whatever reason, are being required to isolate. So I hope you can appreciate that situation as it arises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Okay, moving on. I imagine, like me, you might be confused about some of the guidance that's come out about what to do in the event of suspected coronavirus, and so we've tried to pull together from the DfE guidance an outline of what that looks like from a school point of view. Clearly, no one must come to school if they have any symptoms of coronavirus, and those are clearly well known by everybody. And where and if students develop those symptoms in school, then we will obviously have to isolate them within the school building until such time as parents can come and collect them to take them home. They will not be able to use school or public transport in order to get home. So your support with that will be much appreciated. And we will obviously be trying to get them out of school as quickly as we possibly can, because we don't want to risk cross-infection. And students must self-isolate if they've been in close contact with anyone who develops coronavirus symptoms or someone who tests positive for coronavirus. So it's important that parents are aware of who their sons and daughters are mixing with in order to support that. And anybody, children and adults who display symptoms must book a test, and I've included the link there for you to do that. It's really important that parents inform school immediately of the results of a test, even if that's negative. If they do get a negative test, then they can stop isolating and they can return to school as long as they feel well, and other members of the household can stop self-isolating. However, if they test positive, they need to stay at home for at least 7 days, and everybody else in that household has to self-isolate for 14 days. And again, because this is complicated, we've included the link to the government guidance there on staying at home in the event of symptoms. And it's really important, please, that you contact us with the details of who your sons and daughters have been in contact with, because we may well have to be involving communication with the local health protection team. It says there that anyone the student has been in contact with. I think that's really school related, because obviously we need to ensure that, you know, if they have been in contact the night before, for example, with a student from a different year group, then we really need to know that so that we can forward that information on to the health protection team. Okay, where someone tests positive, either we will contact the health protection team or they will be aware of that situation, and they will perform a risk assessment, and we will then follow their advice about who in school should be sent home to isolate. And obviously that close contact information is really important. So our registers and our student movement needs to be carefully managed and monitored. We put there also the definition of what close contact means, just to clarify for you what that actually means. And you can see that in a lot of cases school will provide close contact, and therefore it's really important that we follow the guidance in the first instance, and then any advice that we're given by local public health support. And I know that they have increased the numbers of their team in order to ensure that they are available to support lots of situations, and including schools. So if someone in school has tested positive, we will contact parents as required, and the advice currently says that household members of those who are sent home do not need to self-isolate unless they develop symptoms. So you wouldn't be expected as parents to stay at home just because there has been some contact within school. However, if they develop symptoms, anyone develops symptoms, they must be isolated for a 14-day isolation period as a minimum. And again, the stay-at-home guidance we've included there. If they then have a negative test, they still have to remain in isolation for the remainder of the 14-day isolation period, and the school needs to be informed of that. If the test is positive, then again, please make sure we're informed, and they must remain isolated for 7 days from the start of the symptoms, and everybody else in that household self-isolates for at least 14 days from the same start point. Again, apologies, these aren't my words, and it's quite a complicated situation. But obviously, local public health are very keen to ensure that we don't cause any sort of localized outbreak, and therefore will be advising us very closely should there be a number of cases within school. So what are we doing in school in order to sort of try and minimise this? We have already introduced an enhanced cleaning regime, and that will be extended into the autumn term, and that will also include the biometric finger reader, because obviously that's a point that every student will touch if they use the dining room facility. We have a number of hand sanitizer stations around the school in key areas, and we have got significant quantities of hand sanitizer, and obviously we'll be maintaining that stock. But we have asked that students bring their own hand sanitizer, please. It's really important that they take personal responsibility for this. We have a significant stock, as I say. However, we aren't given any additional funds either for cleaning or for the provision of hand sanitizer, and so your help would be appreciated in ensuring that we have sufficient stocks and everyone remains safe. Mr. Nocton's mentioned use of equipment and the protocols that we will put into place for that, and obviously our year group based group pods in one location for the majority of their time tries to avoid transmission within school by the mixing of students around the site. I mentioned earlier on, the specialist rooms will either be single year group use or will be cleaned if different year groups have to use the same space during the course of the day. We will have a one-way system in places, and we're trying to minimise the movement around the corridors, because, as you know, some of our corridors are quite narrow. We have started the process of making sure that all the classrooms have the desks facing the front, and to try and minimise face-to-face contact. It's not possible in all of the rooms, particularly in specialist areas, but all the standard classrooms should have front-facing desks. And as Mr. Nocton mentioned, staggered breaks and lunchtimes will also make sure that we keep students from different groups apart as far as possible, and we obviously appreciate the students' support with that. So our non-negotiables here on the left-hand side remain the same. We want to encourage students to do their best and take responsibility to ensure that they're doing well in their learning and in all aspects of school life, even within the limitations that we have. But I think it's really important to point out that we absolutely cannot have behaviour from students that puts the welfare or health of others at risk. And so we will be treating that very, very seriously, and we will be explaining to students the importance of following our guidelines and all of the arrangements that we have in place. It's as much for them and for their wider family that they must follow these arrangements as it is for the welfare of those in school. So it's really important that they follow all of our new expectations in terms of their conduct around school. And moving on from that, just a little bit more detail on that, we do expect students to understand and appreciate those circumstances and to behave appropriately. We will reinforce that with students in the autumn term. But I have to say that the behaviour of the students that have been in school during the lockdown period has been exemplary, and so we're very pleased that students have taken it very seriously and have appreciated what we've tried to do to keep them and all of their families safe through minimising contact between groups. We obviously have developed our remote learning provision over the course of the time that we've been in lockdown, and it's really important that we have provision in place in the event of a localised lockdown or even for a particular year group, for example, who might have to be off school. And so we will be developing that remote learning provision over the course of the next term. We have tried very hard to do our best with that. We appreciate it isn't perfect, and we have also appreciated the constructive feedback we've had and all of the positive comments as well. It's been a very steep learning curve in terms of using Microsoft Teams to deliver presentations like this and teaching, and we would appreciate feedback from students and from parents and carers, and so we will be sending out links to some surveys in the communication on Friday, and we would really appreciate your feedback on that so that we can use that to help improve and refine our remote learning going forward, because I think it's I don't like to use the word inevitable, but I think it's likely that at some point we are likely to have to return to some form of blended approach to learning, at least, if not full remote access to learning outside of school in the coming months. Just a couple of important things for specific year group specifics. Current year 7s, please, if you haven't yet done so, could you please return the new intake pack information, really important medical information that we need prior to September. So if you could please return that, we would appreciate it. Current year 8, you'll be pleased to know, receive their school report issued by Friday. So that's based on work that was happened prior to lockdown and conversations that students have had with their tutors during the lockdown period. Current year 9 received letters last week about their options, and hopefully any issues there have been resolved. And for current years 11 and 13, just a reminder of the results days there. We have yet to arrange in detail how we will manage those days, and it will partly depend on the advice that we receive around that time. So we will inform you of the arrangements for collecting results on those days in August, and we very much look forward to seeing you and celebrating your successes in August. It has been rather a lengthy meeting this evening, and apologies for the, as I said, for the amount of content in the slides, but I hope that we have been able to give you a flavour of what we're planning to do for September. As I said at the start, there are still details that we need to work through, and there are quite a lot of those still to do. So we will update you with any further information that you require during the course of the holiday. And I'm just going to ask Zoe Budding if there is anything that we need to just address that would be useful at this point from questions that have been raised.
There's a number of questions, quite a number of which we need to address in our frequently asked questions document, because they are details that we haven't ironed out. But I've had a number of queries asking about PE outerwear and whether they need to be the PHS branded PE outerwear.
No, we don't want to. Sorry, Zoe. We don't want to increase the expense for parents. Of course, if you want to have the PHS branded outerwear, that's absolutely fine. But we certainly don't expect you to buy that. Please make sure you get the school PE kit. But the outerwear that we've mentioned that will make it possible to sort of wear that during the course of the day, as long as it's plain, as we've suggested, will be absolutely fine.
That's the most frequently asked question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Well, as I said, I hope you found that useful, and we will send out the links to the surveys on our remote learning later in the week. I'm not sure how long after I end this presentation the question and answer remains live, but I think if you don't leave the meeting, you may be able to add some additional questions. Obviously, if you don't have that facility available and you think of anything, then please email the school office. We may not respond immediately. You'll appreciate that we have got an awful lot to do to put everything in place for September, and limited time to do that before some of us have a limited opportunity to go on holiday. But we will make sure that we incorporate anything that is really important in our frequently asked questions document. So thank you very much for your time. May I take this opportunity to wish you a very happy and healthy summer break. I hope that if possible you are able to get away and that you enjoy some downtime at least, and the students many of whom have worked very, very hard also take the opportunity to have a good break and are able to hit the ground running again in September. The resources that we made available through ePraise will remain accessible during the majority of the school holiday. So if students do want to continue to sort of try and catch up with any work that they know they've missed, those resources will be available. And until just before the start of the summer term, where we have to close ePraise for some routine maintenance. So that'll be probably in the final week of the holidays that it won't be available. Could I ask students please to try and avoid emailing their teachers during the holiday, because the teachers do need to have a break and they aren't contracted to work then, and so they may not be able to respond. They will have their own families to look after during their holiday. Thank you all very much, and have a lovely, safe summer.